The People's Democratic Party has rejected a court judgment which sought to extend the tenure of the Federal Capital Territory Area Council administrations by 1 year despite the conduct of fresh elections. The tenure of the current Area Council Chairman is due to end on Friday, May 20th, but the swearing-in of the newly elected officials was put on hold by the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Mohammed Bello, following a court order handed down by Justice Ibrahim Mohammed of the High Court of the FCT on Thursday. Speaking at a press conference at the National Secretariat of the party in Abuja, PDP National Publicity Secretary Debo Ologunagba described the court order as a bizarre judgment. So what does the Constitution say about this? Can the minister be constitutionally found wanton for delaying the swearing-in of the newly elected officials? And can the Electoral Act take a retroactive effect on this? Well, joining us now to have a quick chat around this are Debo Ologunagba, who is National Publicity Secretary of the People's Democratic Party. He will join us later during the interview, but present with us now is lawyer and former president of the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights, Malachy Ugwummadu. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. First of all, I'd like to have your reaction. The ruling from the High Court, is it constitutionally right?
Well, thank you for having me. That question requires a direct answer. And the answer is that once there is a judgment or an order of a competent court of law in Nigeria, that order becomes valid and must be obeyed. Section 287 of the Constitution requires that orders and judgments of superior courts must be obeyed by every person, every authority, every institution, and even individual persons in the country. That is as far as the Constitution speaks. And until that such an order or judgment is set aside, it is a valid judgment of court. However, what I think is at play with respect to this particular judgment is how such a judgment has come in conflict with the express provisions of the Electoral Act in respect of which, or with which, the elections into those area councils were conducted. And I'm referencing the Electoral Act 2010, specifically section 113, which is to the effect that the tenure of the local government chairman and the councillors shall be for a determinable period of 3 years. The change that has been effected with respect to the present Electoral Act Amendment Act 2022 is not the Electoral Act or the legislature that was in place as at the time the election in question was conducted. So that, I think, is the challenge.
Well, you mentioned that it's binding, but what about those who might choose not to honor that court order based on the fact that it has this retroactive element to it? What consequences do we expect to see?
I have stated what the law says, that once a judgment of court is pronounced, everyone, every authority, every institution becomes duty-bound to obey it. And that is section 287 of the Constitution. If you have problems like the PDP validly has now, they have the best of legal advice that will enable them to proceed legally. To outrightly say we will not and we cannot is inviting anarchy. You can take the swiftest of actions to set aside that judgment, and that is possible given the relevant provisions of the law that have been cited. As at the time the election took place, there was no Electoral Act Amendment Act 2022, which has, extended the tenure of local council chairmen and councillors. The election in issue and the tenure of the local government chairmen and councillors under consideration took effect on the basis of the 2010 Electoral Act. And the provision therein is clear as to the tenure, and that is 3 years, period. So if you find it abhorrent and at conflict with what we have at the moment, you have the opportunity, and there are a couple of strategies to get this dispensed with as quickly as possible, including filing an affidavit of urgency and asking for the abridgment of time and seeking for accelerated hearing with respect to the exigency of the moment, and then you have it done. Rather than saying we will not obey the judgment, we cannot be part of that statement signaling the last stop before anarchy.
Now, earlier, the PDP threatened to petition the judge to the National Judicial Council for abuse of court processes. Do they actually have a case, considering the fact that they can appeal the judgment given by this court?
Thank you for that intervention. These are the options and choices at their disposal. However, in law, we know very well that you cannot be in contempt of court and approach the same court for any relief whatsoever. So I think they need the best of advice at the moment to say that, wait a minute, it appears you have a valid case, quickly dust your books, prepare your processes, approach the same court, and seek for the relief of action, or you appeal against the judgment, as it were, and seek for a stay of execution of whatever it is that has been pronounced in that judgment, particularly if it is not a declaratory judgment. However, you cannot be lampooning and publicly insisting that you will not obey the order and still go back to the same judiciary. It will mean that you have not yet put your steps, the contempt which you are committing. It will require that you have to purge yourself of that contempt before you can approach the court. So painful as it is important that they discountenance and exit that route they are taking at the moment, which is publicly insisting that you will never obey that. We don't speak like that in civilized society. Otherwise, it will mean that tomorrow, when it affects the next person adversely, you will take the same step.
Very well said. We're bringing in the PDP National Publicity Secretary now, Debo Ologunagba. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. Of course, you know the subject at hand. Kindly share your thoughts about this, especially the retroactive element. If you can hear me,
Well, it's distressing that...
Okay.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, go ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, it is distressing that this is where we are as a nation at this time. But it is not surprising because this is consistent that came in on the platform of lying and propaganda to the Nigerian nation. But Nigerians have seen through this. And we saw this coming, and we alerted Nigerians. Only yesterday, when we became aware of that phony judgment, we knew something was on the offing. Number one, let's put it in perspective. Constitutions and statutes by law are prospective, not retroactive. And the Supreme Court had severally pronounced on this, that laws cannot be retroactive. And you recall in 2003, during the second term aspiration of President Ugwummadu, it came before the Supreme Court. And with the argument that he has done second term, having been president or head of state of Nigeria under the military rule. And the Supreme Court held that the law, which is the 1999 Constitution, cannot be retroactive. And therefore, the tenure that he has used as head of state under the military cannot count for the purpose of the 1999 Constitution. Now, similarly, statutes cannot be retroactive. That was why, following and flowing from the judicial precedent and the tradition of court and the hierarchy of courts, it was so absurd that a high court of the Federal Capital Territory would completely disobey the hierarchy and the judgment of the Supreme Court in the case I've just referenced. And that tells you there's an orchestration. Now, for clarity and for emphasis, the tenure of the FCT Council and Chairmen expires today. They were elected under the 2010 Electoral Act, which provided for 3-year tenure for council chairmen and their councillors. And it expires today. Now, laws would commence or begin to be effective from the commencement date. The 2022 Electoral Act came into effect from the document itself, from the Act. The commencement date was stated and reflected as 25th of February 2022. Now, because it's an orchestration to begin a process of illegally elongating the tenure of the APC-controlled council official now, they brought in some judgment, which I have here with me, and having there certain individuals as claimants, and curiously, in this court process, only one person is the defendant. You recall that at the election that took place on February 12th, PDP swept the polls with 3 councillors, chairmanship positions and 18 councillorship positions. Even though we recognize that there were certain things that were done on the outskirts, because you recognize that the most important areas of the Federal Capital Territory, the Armak, Kuje, and the Gwari area that are populated by people, the PDP won, which is an expression of the fact that PDP has been accepted by the Nigerian people. Now, having lost that election, the PDP, the APC cannot take that bitter pill. But painfully, and I think we should emphasize this, democracy, the bedrock of it is the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to the other. And you recall in 2015, the PDP demonstrated its democratic principle by peacefully transferring power to the present APC-led administration under that principle of respecting democracy. Now, the APC cannot take that, which is against the will of the Nigerian people, and I can tell you that the Nigerian people will resist it. They will, and as a party, we have taken steps to ensure that the shenanigan in the name of a judgment will not stand.
Mr. Ugwummadu, kindly allow me to interrupt you. Kindly allow me to interrupt you. Earlier, you gave a press conference and you talked about a veiled third-term agenda. How credible is this claim? Do you have any proof to actually back this up? Again, what you do is to look at behaviors. When a government like the APC has been consistent with impunity, you can begin to see the signal of the behavior of a third-term agenda. And I can tell you this. Now, it is strict in law that laws are not retroactive. And you see, because they know that when this happens, people will resist the fact that their will is being abridged. And when people protest in some form, some violence is expected in those kind of things because you don't have control when they begin to spiral down. When that happens,
there might be veiled justification that, oh, it is unsafe now to continue with the elections and therefore we need to postpone. That would be a veiled attempt at elongation of the elections. Now, and the tenure. If it can happen in FCT successfully, then it means some state governors can do that. Apart from that, it will be a justification to say election is not conducive in circumstances. So we saw that and we know that this is a program event orchestrated starting with the judiciary. The judge knows or ought to know, and of course he knows that he cannot disobey the order, the judgment of the Supreme Court, which I referenced earlier. So we saw through this as an orchestration being propelled by the APC. Otherwise, the FCT minister cannot and does not have authority to determine whether the tenure of an elected official has ended or not ended, because he just released a statement stating that there will be no swearing in. It doesn't lie in his mouth to say that. The only authority that can say that is the court, having regards if there is a proper case before it. In
Very
this
well
matter, this is
said.
an orchestrated judgment. Yes, that is where we are drawing our conclusion from, and it's consistent with the pattern. We
Very well
don't want
said.
a situation
Mr.
where
Debo
they will
Ologunagba.
create a crisis situation and then they will tell us, oh, we cannot have elections. We want the elections. INEC is ready, I believe.
Thank
PDP is
you.
ready. Nigerians are ready because we need to express ourselves to Nigerian people.
And you have expressed your thoughts very well, I must say. Thank you, Mr. Debo Ologunagba. You're the National Publicity Secretary of the People's Democratic Party, as well as the former president of the Committee of the Defense and Human Rights, Malachy Ugwummadu. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for joining us on Newsday.